has issued a stark warning. The nation says the US could face retaliatory action.
In 2025, Africa made history. No longer content with quietly supplying the world with raw materials, the continent raised its voice, and the world felt the impact. What had once been isolated moves by individual nations became a bold, collective assertion of sovereignty over natural resources. The global commodities market, long dominated by external players, suddenly faced a new coordinated force, Africa demanding a bigger share of the value it produces. Until now, restrictions on raw material exports from Africa had been scattered. A lithium ban here, a gold policy there. But in 2025, those scattered actions began to form a pattern. Countries across the continent started acting in unison, tightening control over raw exports and demanding that value addition happen on African soil. The message was clear. Africa no longer wants to be the quarry of the world. It wants to be the factory. It all started with Cobalt. In February 2025, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which produces over 70% of the world's cobalt, suspended its cobalt exports for 4 months, citing an oversupplied market and falling prices. But this move wasn't just economic, it was political. When Kinshasa extended the suspension to September, major mining companies like Glencore were left in limbo, and EV battery producers in Europe and Asia began scrambling to source alternatives. For the first time, a major African country had used its control of a critical resource as a strategic lever, not just a trade tool. Next came Zimbabwe. Known for its vast lithium and chrome reserves, the country had already banned the export of unprocessed lithium in 2022. By 2025, enforcement of this policy had intensified, and the government took an even harder line by reaffirming its ban on raw chrome exports. For years, raw minerals had left Zimbabwe in bulk, only to be refined elsewhere and sold back to the country at inflated prices. That dynamic is now being challenged. Zimbabwe has told the world, if you want our lithium and chrome, you'll have to process it here, and you'll have to help us build the industrial infrastructure to do it. Namibia adopted a similar strategy, though on a broader scale. Since 2023, the country has blocked the export of raw lithium, cobalt, manganese, graphite, and rare earths. The goal is simple: force international companies to invest in domestic processing. By 2025, this wasn't just policy, it was practice. Namibia began using its leverage during investment talks, insisting that smelters, concentrators, and processing plants be built locally. Africa was no longer content with digging up the earth and sending it abroad. It wants to refine, manufacture, and profit. The wave didn't stop at minerals. In June 2025, Burkina Faso nationalized 5 gold mines. Unlike a temporary export ban, nationalization is permanent. It signaled that Ouagadougou intended to fully control its gold industry. International investors called it reckless. The Burkinabe government called it liberation. For decades, foreign firms had extracted gold while the country remained among the poorest in the world. Now the leadership wants to change that equation, even if it means challenging powerful economic interests. Elsewhere, governments took more nuanced but equally strategic steps. In February, Botswana renegotiated its long-standing diamond agreement with De Beers, securing more domestic sorting and cutting. In West Africa, Ghana reaffirmed its $400 per ton living income differential on cocoa to boost farmer incomes, while Côte d'Ivoire slashed forward cocoa contracts for the 2025-26 season after poor harvests. These actions reflected a growing determination to rebalance trade relationships that had long favored wealthy importers. Though no formal alliance was declared, the pattern was undeniable. Across the continent, leaders were moving in the same direction: reduce raw exports, build local industries, and take control of resource wealth. Each country had its reasons. Congo wanted to stabilize prices, Zimbabwe aimed for industrialization, Ghana sought to protect its farmers, and Burkina Faso was reclaiming economic sovereignty. But together, these actions amounted to a coordinated refusal to remain on the margins of the global economy. Naturally, this raises a tough question. Why risk alienating the very countries, mostly in the West, that have long been Africa's biggest customers? Wouldn't restricting exports trigger retaliation, such as tariffs or aid cuts? Wouldn't this jeopardize precious foreign exchange flows? For many African governments, the answer is simple: the status quo is unsustainable. Exporting raw materials may bring quick cash, but it traps nations in a cycle of dependency. Africa's economies have suffered under the so-called resource curse, where the presence of valuable natural resources often correlates with poverty, corruption, and underdevelopment. That's because the real profits come not from the pit, but from the factory. The further up the value chain a country operates, the more wealth it can generate. Take chocolate, for example. Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire produce more than 60% of the world's cocoa, but the global chocolate industry is worth over $120 billion annually, and those two countries capture just a tiny slice of that value. The same is true for cobalt, lithium, and other minerals. African nations often export the raw material at low prices, only to import refined products at many times the cost. This imbalance has created a sense that Africa isn't a trading partner, it's a source to be mined. Meanwhile, Western countries have been rolling out industrial policies of their own. The US Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act of 2023 both aim to secure access to minerals for their own industries. To many African leaders, these look like attempts to lock in the old model of resource dependency, just under new branding. That's why the actions of 2025 were more than economic. They were political. They were acts of resistance and ambition. Leaders like Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa and Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré have openly linked economic reform to sovereignty. With nearly 60% of Africa's population under the age of 25, governments are under immense pressure to create jobs, develop infrastructure, and offer real opportunities. Exporting raw materials while importing finished goods won't get them there. Of course, there are risks. Europe relies on African cobalt for its EV batteries, uranium from Niger for nuclear power, and cocoa from West Africa for its food industries. The US and its allies still depend on African minerals, even as they try to reduce their dependence on China. By tightening control over their exports, African nations risk Western backlash. But times have changed. The West no longer holds a monopoly on trade or diplomacy. China, India, Turkey, Russia, and others have deepened ties with Africa, giving countries on the continent alternative options. So what happens now? As Western economies scrambled to adjust, the consequences became visible almost immediately. Europe's electric vehicle manufacturers faced supply shortages when Congo extended its cobalt ban. Cathode producers in Germany and Poland warned of looming production cuts. The chocolate industry saw cocoa prices surge when Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana took control of pricing and volumes. Gold traders in London and Switzerland worried about the long-term implications of Burkina Faso's mine nationalizations. And Namibia's raw mineral export bans threw a wrench into Europe's renewable energy ambitions. More than anything, it was the psychological shock that stood out. For decades, the West took Africa's raw materials for granted. Now that assumption is gone. Africa has shown it can use its natural wealth not just for profit, but as a strategic lever. But this moment isn't just about disruption, it's about construction. Africa is not shutting its doors to the world. It's inviting the world to participate in a new type of partnership, one where raw materials are refined and transformed within Africa's borders, one where value, jobs, and profits are shared more fairly. In Zimbabwe, lithium refining projects backed by Chinese and Indian firms are already underway, with the government requiring processing to happen domestically. In Namibia, new joint ventures are emerging with foreign firms building smelters and battery precursor plants. In Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, new cocoa grinding and chocolate factories are being built. In Burkina Faso, plans for a gold refinery are being discussed to ensure that bullion, not just ore, leaves the country. And in Botswana, more diamond cutting and polishing is happening locally, creating jobs and boosting the country's value-added exports. The goal across all these initiatives is the same: turn raw wealth into real development. Africa is tired of being a resource warehouse. It's positioning itself to become a production hub. This strategy isn't just economically sound, it's politically necessary. With millions of young Africans entering the job market each year, industrialization is no longer optional. Its urgent point. 2025 may well go down as the year Africa stopped exporting its future and started building it instead.